Hi, Donna. Thank you so much for the introduction and instructions. My name is Linda Couch. I'm with the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. Thank you all so much for joining this webinar. We hope it's informative and spurs action from you to Congress. This webinar is being hosted by the Campaign for Housing and Community Development Funding, in which all the national organizations on this webinar, plus many, many others, participate to work together to urge Congress to provide the highest possible funding for housing, homeless, and community development programs. These webinar slides, as well as the recording of the webinar that Donna mentioned, will be posted in the resources area of the capshurtcommunities.org website that this Campaign for Housing and Community Development Funding has developed as we work together to end the spending caps. If you're so inclined, you might want to use the hashtag CapsHurt during this webinar to help raise these issues. Right now, I'm going to introduce the panel. First up, we have Doug Rice, a Senior Policy Analyst with the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. Doug is going to talk about the impact of the caps on housing and community development programs. Doug will turn it over to Robert Friant. Robert will talk about using the media and effectively using communications tools to raise stories and issues of the impact of the caps. Robert is the Director of Communications for CSH. And then Robert will turn it over to Sarah Mickelson, who's a Senior Analyst and Project Manager with Enterprise Community Partners. And Sarah's going to talk about the timing of where we're at related to reaching out to your congressional delegation and some tips for reaching out to your delegation. And then at the end, I'll moderate questions and answers, and we'll hopefully have you off the webinar in about an hour. So with that, I'll turn it over to Doug.
So first, some quick history. So, for better or worse, following the elections in 2010, there was increasing concern in Congress about the rising federal deficit. And so initially, right off the bat, pretty much, we saw a wave of cuts in funding for programs in 2011. And then Congress, also in 2011, approved the Budget Control Act. And the Budget Control Act did two things, really. First, it put in place very stringent spending caps for defense and non-defense programs for over a 10-year period from 2012 through 2021. And in addition, it put in place really strong incentives for Congress to reach agreement on additional deficit reduction measures, and put in place the penalty if Congress did not reach such agreement. There would be sequestration, which meant across-the-board cuts in 2013, which you all have heard a lot about, but it also meant lowering the annual spending caps for defense and non-defense programs for the remaining years from 2014 through 2021. And as you all know, the non-defense category is the category that includes most housing and community development programs. And so we've had, following sequestration, we've had these caps in place, continuing. Now, there was a short-term budget agreement approved through negotiation by Paul Ryan and Patty Murray in the Senate. This had the effect of just moderating the caps for a couple of years in 2014 and 2015, but that was just a two-year deal. And so we're back to the post-sequestration funding caps in 2016, and we'll stay there through 2021 unless Congress takes further action. So this slide provides a big picture view of the effect of all these actions. It shows total funding, discretionary funding, so that's the funding that's approved annually by Congress for non-defense programs from 2010 and then looking forward to 2016. And this is all in constant dollars, so adjusted for inflation. As you can see, there were cuts right off the bat in 2011, and then the first year of the Budget Control Act spending caps locked into place in 2012, which forced additional cuts, sequestration in 2013, and then the dark blue bars in 2014 and 2015 show the very modest relief from the sequestration level caps that we enjoyed in those years. And then in 2016, we're back to the sequestration cap level. Just a quick note on sequestration caps. So sequestration in 2013 meant across-the-board cuts in virtually every program. In 2016 and beyond, looking forward, sequestration really just means the caps are lowered, so it's not across-the-board cuts. It just means that Congress has to hit a specific overall funding target in those years, which it certainly will do. Okay, so that's the big picture view, and as you see, so the cap in 2016 compared to the current year, in nominal terms, so without adjusting for inflation, the cap in 2016 for non-defense programs is roughly flat with the 2015 cap. But what this graph shows is the change in inflation-adjusted terms, and so you see a reduction there. Okay. Whoops, sorry about that. Yeah, all right. So this is a picture focusing just on funding for housing assistance programs. As you can see, there was 3 waves of initial cuts, the 2011 appropriations, and then the caps hit in 2012, and then sequestration in 2013. And then the effect of the Murray-Ryan deal in 2014 and 2015 was to partially restore funding for housing programs. But as you can see, we're still well below the 2010 level adjusted for inflation. And these numbers shown here include all housing assistance, including USDA as well as HUD programs. Now, with respect to individual programs, this shows the change in annual funding as of 2015 relative to 2010, adjusted for inflation for most of the major housing and community development programs. As you can see, hit the hardest has been public housing on the far left, a reduction of almost $1.7 billion per year, and then the 2 big block grants, community development block grant and the home program as well. But virtually every major area of housing and community development funding has seen reduced funding over this period. That's the funding picture. I think it's fair to say, though, that in terms of immediate impact on low-income families, the biggest effect of the funding caps and sequestration in particular has been in the voucher program. Following sequestration from early 2013 through mid-2014, because of the sequestration cuts, housing authorities were forced to cut back on the number of families using vouchers, and we lost about 100,000 vouchers over that 16-month period. With the additional money that Congress provided in 2014 and 2015 following the Murray-Ryan deal, agencies have fortunately begun to restore some of those vouchers. And so you see in this graph here, this is just the number of families using housing vouchers with some adjustments. And there was the steep loss from December 2012 through June 2014, and then some restoration in the second half of 2014 and the first half of 2015. Agencies have restored about 30,000 of the 100,000 vouchers, so about a third of them. But of course, we're still down about 70,000 vouchers compared to the pre-sequestration level, despite the fact, of course, that in almost every community in the country there are long waiting lists for assistance, and and generally only about 1 in 4 eligible families receives any kind of federal rental assistance at all. Okay, so what does it look like going forward? So this is a portrayal of total spending for housing assistance, federal housing assistance, relative to GDP, which is just a measure of the size of the economy. It kind of gives you a sense of, given the resources available to us, what share of those are we devoting to housing assistance from 1980 and then extended out through 2020. And as you can see, in the extension from 20, the projection from 2015 through 2020, what we did here is we assumed that the share of total non-defense discretionary funding that would be for housing assistance would remain the same from 2015 through 2020, and then looked at the effect of the funding cap put in place by the Budget Control Act for non-defense programs over that period. And as you can see, unless Congress decides to raise the caps, we're on pace to see even deeper cuts over the next 6 years. And in fact, under this projection, as of 2021, total funding will be the lowest in about 40 years as a share of gross domestic product. So if we don't fix things now, things are only going to get worse if we don't raise the caps. Okay, so that's the longer-term possible outlook. What about 2016 if Congress fails to raise the caps? Well, as I mentioned, the 2016 cap for non-defense programs is about the same as the 2015 cap in nominal terms. However, because of for some technical reasons, partly because Congress has already approved a large spending increase for veterans medical care in 2016. In addition, the HUD budget in part relies on receipts from its FHA mortgage insurance programs, and those receipts are expected to decline, and so those are resources that have to be made up in other ways in 2016. Because of all these factors, even though the cap is roughly flat in 2016 compared to 2015, the fact is the amount of funding available for programs will be a bit more than 1% lower in nominal terms, and that's not counting losses due to inflation. So what does that mean for the HUD budget? So, we're looking at total funding that's slightly less in 2016. On the one hand, the House and Senate Appropriations Committees appear committed to renewing rental assistance for the major rental assistance programs, the voucher program, and especially the project-based Section 8 rental assistance program. And this is to ensure that families' assistance isn't terminated. But to do that is going to require a sizable increase in funding next year, about $1 billion for the project-based Section 8 program and about $560 million for the voucher program. And so if the overall cap is roughly flat or slightly lower, and we need significant increases in funding to prevent the termination of rental assistance for current families using vouchers or living in project-based units, it has to be made up somewhere else, either in the HUD budget or outside the HUD budget. And this, of course, inside the HUD budget, the major targets there would be the programs that have done poorly to date under these caps, public housing and especially the 2 big block grants. And so there's a real risk here. It will be challenging, to say the least, under the current caps for Congress to both renew current rental assistance without making some cuts in other areas. And so those are difficult choices, and there's really no avoiding difficult choices under current caps, which I think is the bottom line here. And with that, I'm going to pass things along to Robert. Thank you.
Hi, before Robert starts, this is Linda. I just wanted to say a couple of things about timing. And as folks know, we started this fiscal year 2016, without a HUD appropriations bill or a rural housing appropriations bill, and Congress has passed a short-term continuing resolution to keep federal programs funded through only December 11th. And so Congress is working now on this budget deal, hopefully, to raise the caps that Doug just reviewed and reach a deal before December 11th when the continuing resolution runs out. So the timing now for action and for people interfacing with their U.S. delegation is really spot on. This is the time to reach out. Some other deadlines to be aware of. Congress has been made aware by Treasury that the nation will hit its debt limit on November 3rd. November 3rd then could also be a focal point for things coming to a head in negotiations, and I think people are, lose a little bit of hope every day, but it's possible that some kind of agreement could be worked out around the November 3rd deadline on the debt ceiling. The White House, House and Senate leadership from both parties, have reportedly been meeting at a staff level and, to work out all the details before all the principals get together in the same room. Republican leaders have, said, along with Democratic leaders in the White House, that the caps are unworkable, that they need to go. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has been clear that, he'd like to see the caps raised, and, he's also open to, or I think would look forward to, a 2-year deal that would raise the caps not just for this fiscal year but for the next one. So that while the talks continue, obviously the House is in somewhat disarray, not having a Speaker of the House and a clear leader for, who will be in place as the House leader come January or even December. That's sort of the lay of the land right now as Congress is, in theory, working on raising these caps, but they're also facing the debt limit. They're starting to bicker about what the offsets would be for raising the caps. And the President, meanwhile, has said he's not interested in signing another short-term continuing resolution. So all these things, once again, make us all wonder if Congress is setting themselves up for another government shutdown or, just in the nick of time that will once again be avoided. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Robert.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Linda. I appreciate that background. And with all of the data and dysfunction, the data that Doug's provided and the dysfunction that Linda's explained, you may all be wondering exactly how you can get your message out. And one thing that I want to recommend strongly is to get back to basics and to think about storytelling. An effective story can get your message out quite well. As the saying goes, nothing beats a good story, and that's true even today as the media world has changed considerably, but nonetheless, the basics of a good story still resonate and have impact. So we want to encourage you to first and foremost make sure that you keep your story and the stories that you have very real. We want to convey to people just how much these cuts are hurting on the local level. It's good to know the national perspective, but when you're talking to media and frankly, the rest of the general public, you should be focused on what's happening locally. So think globally, but talk locally. Keep it real and keep your story as brief as possible, but I should add that if a little bit more will add greater impact to your story, don't be constrained by trying to stay within 300 words or something like that. Make sure first and foremost that what you're conveying is going to cause people to want to be helpful and to take action. So again, it's about your local needs, the progress or the pain. Please, when you're telling your stories, we all know on this call HUD and DHHS and the White House and long names for many of the acts that help so many of the people we serve. But when you are writing and telling a story, or electronically, if you are taping, and we highly encourage that, if you're doing audio, video, then you want to make sure that your story really doesn't get into all of those acronyms and long titles. And certainly you want to stay away from long, drawn-out explanations of programs and processes. You want to talk about the people who are being impacted and how these caps are hurting them. Another thing that I want you to remember from this call is that the focus should be on your local media with op-eds or LTEs if you're going that route. In terms of LTEs, of course, are letters to the editors. If you're going that route, you want to make sure that you're focused on the local media. Those members of Congress who you deal with certainly read the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Chicago Tribune or the LA Times, but most importantly, they're focused on a lot of the local publications. And although newspapers have lost their luster somewhat, they still do carry a weight, and you should not ignore them. And your local television stations, your local radio stations, all still very much in the mix and should be hearing from you with your local stories. Just to give you an idea, we've used surveys very effectively in our conversations, in our storytelling. Certainly for the Caps Hurt campaign, one thing that we've done is gone out and asked providers who we deal with, partners that we deal with, to come to us with stories about how they're being hurt, how the people they serve are being hurt by the caps. In Illinois, just to bring it to another level, where the state budget is in crisis, just as it is on the federal level, we've gone out with a survey. We partnered with a number of groups in Illinois, and a very effective survey asking some pointed questions to providers about how cuts are hurting them and the people who are coming in looking for help. We've then taken those surveys, those stories, and we have gotten them out. We've disseminated them so that people understand what's happening. And these have been particularly successful and covered quite well by local media. So I want to make sure that you're looking at novel ways to get your stories out. Social media isn't so novel anymore. Most people are using it. In fact, the overwhelming majority of folks are now on social media, and that covers all demographics. There are some myths that remain that older Americans are not on social media. That's not true. Social media now cuts across all the lines. And most importantly, many of the journalists, many of the media outlets, in fact, again, most of those media outlets, certainly your members of Congress, they're all on social media. So we need to be there too, telling our stories. Blogs, don't forget those, and I want to stress them because we've been particularly successful using our Huffington Post blog as a platform and finding other blog portals to run those series whenever they appear in the Huffington Post. And we want to make sure that you on the local level are looking at blog opportunities through social media, through your media outlets. Many of them do offer blog spaces, and you should be using them. And also the comment sections that you see whenever stories that are germane to the caps, to the budget situation as it deals with housing appears, you should be on the comment sections of your newspapers or television stations, radio stations, adding your voices to the comments that appear. So effective storytelling comes down to knowing your audience, what drives them, particularly what will drive them to take action. People really don't remember bullet points. We're told often to use bullet points, and I can tell you, study after study in communications, people really do not focus on bullet points, and the wonkish stuff, of course. And you probably already know anything that includes acronyms, et cetera, usually goes over the heads of the majority of the general public. So feelings, not analytical thinking, drive actions. And although Doug gave us a lot of very good data, and that's good to know, and certainly it's something that you can use a little bit in your background for your stories, talking about people and how caps are hurting them, you want to use your data sparingly. Make sure that your stories have flow, that they have a clear beginning. There's a clear indication of what's happening as a result of the spending cuts, and you also want to make sure that people understand the outcome, whether it's good or bad. And certainly we want to make sure that people are brought into the process, are engaged in what we're doing, and that there's a specific call for action and quick action, something that they can do immediately. You want to make sure that you're out there collecting as many stories as possible. And when you're doing so, you want to think like a reporter, making sure that the stories that you're collecting are believable, that you have all the facts to convey the story properly, that you cover the basics, who, what, where, when, and you want to make sure that the story is engaging, that it doesn't get bogged down or it isn't bogged down in a bunch of technicalities or procedural issues. You want to make sure you focus on people. Sarah's going to say this a little later on, but putting a human face on your stories is absolutely essential in the media. And again, it's about the people, not the programs. You want to collect all story ideas that you can, and don't think that anything is too small. When you're getting your stories, when you're collecting them, everyone, practically speaking today, has a phone that can video, a tablet. Certainly, if you're able to record your stories and then edit them into an appropriate length of time, then that's the most effective way, certainly on social media, to get your story out. And with your local organizations, it's always good to have a sounding board, a group of people who are listening to the stories that you've collected to tell you whether or not that it's an impactful story, whether it needs a little bit of work, whether it's something that should be disseminated to a broader audience. And of course, we've listed here some channels which many of you are already familiar with. Believe it or not, websites are often overlooked when it comes to storytelling. We encourage people to, if you have a website, an active website, to make sure that the users who go to your website, your homepage, are able to find the stories very quickly and understand that the stories are about the spending cuts and how they're hurting people. You also, again, I can't say this enough, as much as you can be out there blogging and sharing those blogs through social media, all of this is something that social media has become, at least for us, one of, well, I will say the most effective way to get our message out. We've had quite an uptick over the past year in our own use of social media and the amount of followers who are looking to us on social media. So I want to encourage that. And again, because many of the journalists, many of the media outlets that you wish to concentrate, you want them to focus on your story, many of them have Twitter handles, they're on Facebook, and it's the same with your members of Congress. So make sure that social media is weaved into everything. Direct emails, what we used to call direct mail, is now the direct email, and that is still, from a marketing communications perspective, the most effective way to reach people is to get out, to push out your message to a list of individuals who you want to engage and you hope to engage in the cause of reversing these cuts. Any opportunities you have locally to speak and to educate the community, you should avail yourself to those opportunities, and you should be telling the stories to whatever gathering will allow you to do so. And of course, when you're looking for stories and you're sharing stories, one of the best ways to do it is to encourage user-generated stories. So encourage your online community. If you're on Twitter, if you're on Facebook, whatever social media accounts you have, to tell their stories and then share those stories with others. So that's pretty much what we wanted to cover, and now I'm pleased to turn it over to Sarah, who is going to talk about engaging members of Congress.
Hi, everybody. This is Sarah Mickelson. Thank you. I'm a senior analyst with Enterprise Community Partners, where I handle our appropriations work. Today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about engaging your members of Congress over the next few weeks and why this is so critically important. As Linda mentioned, Congress is beginning to negotiate a possible budget deal to raise the spending caps, and that's why it's really critical for affordable housing and community development organizations and advocates to be reaching out to their members of Congress and to let them know what's at stake if they don't do that. But before I start, I just want to remind people that advocacy is critical to your mission. It's very important that every affordable housing and community development group that's out there plays an active role in advocating for the issues that matter most to your mission and the people you serve in your community, in the same way that's important for anybody who benefits from the programs to do so as well. The key to this advocacy, however, is investing the time and resources necessary to build and sustain long-term relationships with your senators and representatives. So if advocacy is not already a part of your strategy or mission, you might want to consider adding it, for the simple reason that we really can't solve the housing challenges in our communities without having an advocacy component. So as a reminder, if you're not speaking on behalf of your communities, who will? Next slide. So CHCDF meets regularly with members of Congress, but what we hear time and again is that they need to hear directly from constituents, people in their district, whether organizations that use the programs or the people who benefit from them. When you do so, you'll want to join organizations and advocates from across the country in sharing a simple, unified message. And our message to members of Congress is that it's time to pass a housing budget that works for our communities. It's time to raise the spending caps and fully fund housing programs. We need members of Congress to see why these spending caps and sequestration in general is depriving communities and families of the affordable housing and other resources that they need to thrive. So we're asking everyone to make 3 calls, ideally, 1 call to each of your senators and 1 to your representative. If you need help doing that, you can call the Capitol switchboard. The numbers on the slide that we'll be sending out later. And you can also feel free to give us a call, and we can help put you in touch with the right person there. It's also important to remember that you should be reaching out to your members of Congress regardless of whether they're Republican or Democrat, whether they're on leadership or not. We need as many members of Congress to be hearing from their constituents about why it's important to raise the spending caps. So after you share that unified message, you'll want to connect the dots a little bit for them. So if you feel comfortable about it, you can talk about specific programs or concerns that you have. When you do this, you'll want to connect the excellent work that you guys are doing in your communities with the federal programs that support that work, and what the impact would be if the caps aren't lifted. The best way to do this, as Robert also mentioned, is to put a human face on the work that you're doing. So if you email or you're meeting with a member of Congress, or even if you're talking with them on the phone, you'll want to cite an example of your work and how you're serving your district. You can tell them what federal dollars are going into these projects, and tell them about a family or a person who's benefited from them. And the same way, you're going to want to put a human face on the impact of the cuts. So talk to them about, who in your community is going to be most impacted, what types of projects will be harder to build or won't be built because of the spending caps, and how does it affect the work that you do as an organization. So for example, if you use home funds to provide down payment assistance to home buyers, you can talk about the proposed cuts to home and how as a consequence you won't be able to serve as many home buyers. You can bring examples of different families that have used the program to put a human face on what that actually does. Finally, just a couple of reminders. A lot of times when advocates go to meet with their members of Congress, they're sometimes so concerned about conveying their message that they forget to listen to the response that they get. So I just want to remind you that finding out their views is just as important as conveying your own, because it gives us a little bit more insight on how we can make our message more persuasive. It also tells us from a national level where we should be focusing our efforts. Another reminder is just to always follow up with them. If they ask for additional examples of your work, be sure to respond as quickly as possible. If they happen to ask for information that you don't have on hand, for example, if they want to know how the spending caps impact a particular program, let them know that you'll look into it, and feel free to reach out to us. We're more than happy to help, because we want to make sure that you're able to continue to build that relationship with your members of Congress. And finally, try to keep in touch with us. If you get any intelligence that you might gather, for example, are they in favor of raising the spending caps, or do they think they should be in place? Do they support the programs that you mention, or are they not yet champions? Do they mention anything on timing? Those are all important pieces of information that help us better focus our efforts at the national level. So we have another slide later on that gives you our email addresses, so you should feel free about just getting in touch with us and letting us know how your meetings went. And with that, I'll open it up to questions. I think Linda's going to lead that effort.
Thanks, Sarah. Well, thanks to all the panelists. And if you have a question, you can go ahead and type it in to the your webinar interface screen. We did have one question, and Robert, I do think that this would be a great question for you. I think, Robert, you mentioned, really focus on people and the individuals impacted, not so much on programs. The question is, why do we feel that programs should not be a focus when we have some rather invaluable programs that do require funding? So, and follow-up part of that question is, are there any programs that you think that are currently working so well, or in such a way that they could act as a model that we might be able to use as examples?
Well, I don't think it's so much a matter of not mentioning them. It's how we talk about them. Instead of saying Section 8 or FOP, or using a description or a title that the general public may not understand, or may sound so sterile that it sort of takes away from the impact of the story. What we suggest is talking about how people are helped. In other words, instead of saying a Section 8 voucher or something to that effect, that we talk about families who are struggling, or individuals who are struggling to make their rent, and so that they receive subsistence to help them. In other words, it's not so much do not talk about the programs, it's how we talk about the programs. And it's much more effective to talk about the program in terms of how it's helping the individual than it is to give it some acronym or sterile-sounding name that people just don't relate to. It's a little bit counterintuitive because usually from communications people you're hearing you should use the least amount of words to explain something, and it's very quick to write or say Section 8. And I'm just using that as an example. I'm not picking on it, but using it as an example. But in this case, it actually helps to explain the assistance a little bit and what the program does and how it helps the person. So you can talk about the program. It's just the way we talk about it that's important. And certainly, I think, and certainly, I just want to add, I think the vouchers, at least for us here at CSH, and I think for everyone in this campaign in the coalition, the vouchers are very successful. We know that those vouchers work to lift people out of homelessness, for example. So we like to talk about them in terms of people who are struggling and who need assistance because housing is not affordable, and we're helping them to afford housing through these programs.
Thank you. There was another question about, the question is, why is HUD's current homeless assistance renewal application that's due in about a month allowing communities to go after something like 15% in new funding? My response, and I'd like to hear what other people think, is that homeless assistance funding is one place where Congress has been providing some increases, and so there are some some new dollars available in that arena. I don't know if anyone else wanted to chime in. All right. Someone also asked if our data charts will be posted. They will be posted. We're going to share them with everyone who registered for the webinar. They'll also be posted under the resources section of the website, capshurtcommunities.org. But you should expect to get them in the mail directly. Again, if you had a question, you can go ahead and type it in to the web interface screen under Q&A. Was there anything else any of the panelists wanted to add in general about the webinar or timing or negotiations?
I just wanted to weigh in, on timing issues. So Linda had mentioned that possible negotiations over raising the debt ceiling would happen by November 3rd or 4th. So that means that over the next couple of weeks is a really great time to be reaching out to your members of Congress before then. And then we'll see at that point whether or not that negotiation includes raising the spending cap. So you might have to go back to them again later in November.
Thank you. We did have a question which, we agree. The question is, why isn't the government offering more vouchers? It costs more than triple the amount of tax dollars to keep people in emergency shelters. It's a funding issue, right? That there's a limited amount of money for domestic discretionary programs, and I think we've seen the voucher program get cut pretty significantly, as Doug's charts show. They were one of the big programs to take a big hit by the 2013 sequester, and Congress is yet to restore all the vouchers that were lost in the sequester. So we haven't even dug ourselves out of the sequester hole yet in the voucher program. But and I think it's important to keep raising these kind of good government questions of, if we're spending $8,000 a year on a voucher versus $24,000 a year or whatever it may be for an emergency shelter, doesn't it make sense to provide more vouchers and get people more stably housed? And the research, I think, clearly shows that it does make more sense, but it's switching over. And when Congress provides one new voucher, the appropriators don't look at it as $8,000. They look at it as $8,000 for the rest of forever, and as a commitment that they're always going to renew that voucher. And so, they don't look at it just as a one-time cost, but they really get terrified over those long-term costs, which are, of course, a third less than they would be if people were spending the money on the shelter system. I don't know if anyone else wanted to chime in.
Yeah, Linda, I think that's a perfect example of when we're messaging, when we're telling our story, we oftentimes cite the fact that it's 3 times more expensive. We often cite the fact that there is now a great deal of data that proves that vouchers work, that vouchers help struggling families, struggling individuals get back on their feet, and it really does bring them the stability that they need to address a host of other issues. So I think when you explain it in those terms, it does resonate with people, and we absolutely should be focused on how much it's saving. Without getting into a lot of long numbers and a lot of zeros, we should be talking about the fact that it costs 3 times as much. And it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make common sense to keep on doing something that's not working. And we also know that the vouchers work.
I don't have any other questions up in front of me. Again, the website and the webinar and the slides and the recording will be emailed to you. And we will, we'll get back to you. If you have any additional questions, here's our contact information. You can reach out to any of us. I'm just reading a question now about the Boston area voucher, and I'm going to probably ask Doug to email you an answer to that question. All right, so sorry to get sidetracked there, but we really appreciate you getting on. I want to say a special thank you to Enterprise Community Partners for hosting the webinar platform, and to Donna Dunlap at Enterprise for facilitating all the back end of the webinar. We really appreciate it. So thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Linda. And this now concludes today's webinar. We're glad you could join us. Goodbye.